Hello, Belinda. My name is Andrew Perez. I'm interviewing you for the South Texas Archives at Texas A&M University Kingsville. This is part of Voices of the Pandemic Oral History Project in partnership with the Voices Oral History Center at the University of Texas. Please know, Ms. Perez, interview subject, that this recorded interview will be placed in the South Texas Archives at Texas A&M University Kingsville, shared with the Voice Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. If there's anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, especially given that the recording may appear online, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there is something you want to talk about, please bring it up. We'll talk about it.
Okay.
Alrighty. I'm going to ask you some 6 simple questions. You can agree, but yes or no, and we can get right into that, okay?
Okay.
Do you give us consent to archive your interview with the materials of the Jurgen Library at Texas A&M University Kingsville?
Yes.
Do you grant South Texas Archives at the Jurgen Library at Texas A&M University Kingsville the copyright over the interview and any material you provided?
Yes.
Do you agree to allow South Texas Archives at the Jurgen Library at Texas A&M University Kingsville to post this interview on the internet where it will be viewed by people around the world?
Yes.
Do you grant South Texas Archives at the Jurgen Library at Texas A&M University Kingsville to consent to share your interview and your materials with the Voices Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin for inclusion of the Voices of a Pandemic Oral History Project, which was included during post the interview?
Yes.
Alrighty. Well, I have 2 more questions for you. Do you wish for us to share the rest of this interview in your public file available at the Research South Texas Archives at the Jurgen Library at Texas A&M University Kingsville?
Yes.
On occasion, Voices receive requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone number or email with the journalist?
Yes.
Alrighty. Thank you. Let me see one more thing right before we get into our interview. Okay. Alrighty. So tell me a little bit about your experience with COVID-19. You know, where did you first learn about it from? Was it the radio, TV? Was it the kids?
Actually, it was the internet. I was still working for Coastal Plains Community Center, and I would occasionally see the story pop up on the internet. So I started paying closer attention as the numbers started spiking or trending upwards, rather, on the CDC world map. I was also a nursing student. So when we started hearing a little bit more of this was probably December, January of 2020. We were somewhat concerned, but we were kind of viewing it as something like the virus. So part internet, part nursing instructors is where I initially heard about it.
Okay, and was this during 2020 or 2019 of December?
Gosh, I don't even know. Oh, well, December, 2019, because we shut down in 2020. Yes, so December 2019.
Okay, just want to clear that up. Okay, and like at one point, did you realize was this like serious? You think, nah, it can't be that serious?
I don't know that it was really any point that I considered it like, oh my gosh, this is scary, this is serious. I think with any virus, they all have the tendency of being serious. I think what surprised me most was just the impact it had as far as the extremes that we went. But I think maybe at that point, March or so of 2020, when things started to shut down, where, we got spring break and then they're like, okay, we're going to extend spring break. And then they're like, okay, we're just going to shut the schools down. Nobody can go to church. So I guess that's when it seemed a little more serious at that point, around March or so.
Alrighty, yeah. And how did it impact you, your children, your family, your neighbors, or, even church? How did that really affect y'all?
Well, in the home setting, I guess it impacted us in the sense that, we were all sent home. So we all had to make that adjustment of not only being, the student myself, but having more students in the house. It was a big adjustment for the teachers, being that they've never done online. So they were having to make packets. The kids were working out of workbooks while I'm doing my online, classes. And then it turned into where they had to create this whole virtual program. So in a sense, these kids were in a way forced into the online setting, almost like adults are when they start attending college. So it was a little difficult in that it's hard enough for a new college student, 18, 19, to take online classes and have that discipline of getting their work done, much less getting a 10-year-old or a 13-year-old to do it. I mean, I can imagine the ones that have younger kids, 6, 7 years old, that must have been a big, change for them. And not only that, we're supposed to be limiting the time children spend on computer or tech, with any type of electronics. And here we were literally telling them to sit in front of the computer all day in some sense. As far as work goes, I got laid off from my job. School wise, it got a little scary in that we were supposed to be doing clinical rotation. So we were supposed to be out there in the hospitals. And being an LVN coming into the RN program, my mentality was, well, this is what I signed up for. So if it's going to make or break me becoming a registered nurse, well, then put me out there. I cannot afford to not be able to graduate because I couldn't get my clinical hours. And, that was a discussion that we had with our instructors, that we might not be able to graduate because we couldn't make our clinical hours. Thankfully, they were able to provide us with some virtual clinical experiences, which are nowhere near what you get hands-on. So in that sense, I think as students, we were deprived. We didn't get the hands-on clinical experience that you truly need in order to really see what it's like to be a nurse once you hit the floor. Not being able to go to church, I think, was a major, major blow. Just because that kind of prepped me for the week. Go to mass, hear the word, kind of go out on that mission for the week, and not being able to have that was really sad. I couldn't help but think about people in other countries who, pandemic or not, are not allowed to go to church, and to worship. So that hit us pretty hard as well.
No, of course, and definitely it's been hard on a bunch of us too, going through these different types of adjustments in our lives, especially taking away time together around and that leads perfectly into our next question. Is now how was going out during COVID? Like, was it different for you? Like, if at all, has COVID impacted your ability to get out with your family or friends for like important events?
Oh, definitely. Some were a little more paranoid than others, and rightfully so. Everybody has their own way of thinking. But I just found it very hard to believe that I could go shop at Walmart and HEB at basically at any given time, but I couldn't go to places like church, or I couldn't gather, with a small crowd without being, frowned upon. Sports for that matter. My family is so sports oriented that we wrap up football season and we move right into track season, which it impacted track season, just dead on, and it took that away from us. And being that something like track is outdoors, kind of blew my mind that they're going to cancel something like that, but they can shove us all into Walmart. So I had a bit of a hard time adjusting to that. As far as the masks go, that was another hard thing to kind of, I don't want to say get used to, but to follow the directives, because there were so many people just going around with what basically, is equal to, the sleeve of a t-shirt. And how much protection can that possibly, provide? But you just needed to have your mouth covered. So I just kind of found that, it just made it that much more difficult to I guess, participate in the mandates, because not everybody was really complying. So it was a little frustrating, to say the least.
No, I totally understand. And like you're right, it has been an adjustment for everyone else, especially, impacting people, their families, the point of events. I know people are missing out on graduations. I know a few people in mind that, their graduations being pushed back, from the 2020 year, and some even be affected in this 2021 year. They're just having to do makeups with that. I'm gonna go
Yeah.
ahead. I'm gonna pause the interview for a second because I have to readjust a few things. We'll get right back into it. Okay, they're finally back. Okay, so you talked about your children and how, affected they were, leaving school, having to come online. What are some of the challenges that your children face, moving to the online module education? Are any of the resources or tools you needed for your children to do well in school? Um, you know,
Yes, thankfully initially they were packets. So they sent the children home with these thick packets, and they were a little bit intimidating with all the work that they tried sending out to them. But eventually they were able to provide laptops for all the children. One thing that was difficult was that it got to a point where, well, towards the end of last year, it wasn't, which last school year, it wasn't too well organized, as it was. They had a difficult time trying to adapt. We were already in March. What are we going to do with the kids for April and May? So there was a lot of let's just get on these few websites. So they gave us some websites to go to, and there really was no type of assessments that they could give the kids to see if they were really ready to move on to the next grade. Thankfully, we were already past the midway point, so I think from there they could pretty much tell who was able to, move on to the next grade level. Once the school year picked back up in August of 2020, they were a little more prepared in that they actually had a lesson plan. So the kids would get up and they kind of formed a routine, and they were responsible, for remembering what time they needed to get online, because, I had to go slowly back into class. So I wasn't here all day to tell them, it's 8:30, you have to log on, or, you have this lunch. So there's a lot of responsibility on them. On some instances, like band. How do you do band, with an instrument, while you have another kid in the house trying to learn, and while you have me trying to do a clinical rotation online. So we all had to kind of make these little mini offices in the house for the kids to try to figure out how they're going to get their stuff done. And then you have a kid over here who's playing drums and having to find out how to record himself, and and it's a little, I mean, it's difficult if you've ever tried to be in front of the camera and record yourself, and how many times do you hit the that's delete and restart, delete and restart. So we went through that so many times, and then he'd finally finish his recording, get it just the way he'd liked it, and then for some reason video's too large to send. So we ran into all these little bumps in the road, and thankfully the teachers were very understanding. I think we had to be understanding on both parts. It's not easy for a teacher to just totally rethink their whole lesson plan virtually, so I was grateful for when the schools did kind of start opening back up a little bit. The kids have been going back to school now full time, I think, since probably late September or so. So that was really nice. It gave them back a sense of normalcy. They were happy to see their friends. They were just glad to be out of the house, and to see different faces. So I'm grateful for that.
Yes, and like you said too, like with like lunch and stuff, they had a period. Did they by any chance, like during the initial shutdown, distribute any food at all?
Yes, I believe within, gosh, when they learned that they were going to have to go this route, yes, we had free meal pickup every day between certain hours. And what was really nice is it wasn't just for the students that were in school. If they had younger siblings, they would also provide them with a meal. And so they would provide lunch, breakfast, lunch, and a dinner. So that was really, really nice. And I mean, I'm very grateful for that. That's really a blessing in a lot of cases, where people can't afford, or if they're afraid to go to Walmart or HEB. There was a time when, the toilet paper is something I can never understand, all this panic buying that went on. And I mean, I remember seeing videos of HEB not having meat,
Mhm.
just different necessities, so I know that we're very grateful for, our community is very grateful that the school provided those meals for our kiddos, for sure.
Yeah. And with that being said, I know you talked a little bit about like, with your clinicals and everything else, now that school is getting back to normal, if you'd even call it that, are there still any challenges that you're facing with your own education?
Not at the moment. I've finished nursing school, so I don't need the clinical experience right now. The classes I am taking are all online. So although, well, I will say this, in some ways it is impacting my schoolwork, because a lot of my research papers, um, a lot of my discussions involve COVID. Whereas pre-COVID, well, there were, I'm sure our instructors didn't plan on having us write, research papers on
Mhm.
COVID and what have you. So in that sense, it still kind of impacts my education.
Yes. And the other thing I like to bring up is, is healthcare, like what kind of like, health to provide, like what kind of concerns or, questions about healthcare have emerged, as a result of COVID, like how has it changed the way you're doing or getting your healthcare, was there any mental
Um,
challenges?
not really for, for my end. I'm a nurse, so we just don't go to the doctor as it is. We're the most non-compliant population ever, and so we tend to do that with our kids too. So one thing that I made sure that I did was that when everybody was out buying toilet paper, I went and I bought over-the-counter medication. So I
Hmm.
stocked up on Tylenol, ibuprofen, cough medicine, decongestants, you know, um, allergy medication. I hit that spot up.
Like you
Vitamins.
think,
That's what
like,
I did.
yeah, like the thing, what do you think people would try to, get to first?
Exactly, because I'm thinking, okay, we're fighting a virus. A virus cannot be cured. A virus is like a cold in a sense. What do we do with a cold? We treat the symptoms. Toilet paper is not going to do that for my family. But if I have a decongestion, if I have some Tylenol, or, God forbid they get something else, but everybody starts panic buying, because guess what? After the toilet paper ran out, that's exactly what they did. You can find rubbing alcohol, you can find peroxide. So thankfully, I went and I stocked up on all that stuff. I always have plenty of Clorox to disinfect. And I just kept those routines. I kept the routine of washing my hands, sanitizing my counters, but I also made it a point to go outside and get some fresh air. Just because you're in quarantine or you're mandated to stay home does not mean that you cannot go outside. A lot of people suffer from allergies, or especially seasonal allergies, because they don't go outside, especially our children. They don't have the ability to build up that immune system because they're not exposed to it in a sense. So in that aspect, I don't think our healthcare was impacted as much, because we pretty much stayed healthy throughout the whole time. And if we did, feel a little under the weather, we were able to treat it with the things that I bought over the counter. But also, in some instances, we were able to call the doctor and say, you know what, these are the symptoms. Can you call something in? Which is something that we were able to do pre-COVID anyhow. So it worked out in that manner, thankfully.
Yes, and with that being said, were there any like mental health impacts due to this, for you or your family or anyone you might have known because of this?
I've heard, that people have struggled, but I think what we were blessed with is that we're a pretty big family, and that there was always somebody around joking, laughing, always somebody coming up with something creative. We have our big backyard, and one of our things, pre-COVID was always to have, barbecues in our backyard. So we were still able to do those things and play board games, dominoes, rummy, and within the family. So we kind of kept each other, I think, sane. And in the moments that we felt a little crazy, just kind of give everybody their space, so to speak, and then, not address, not the what's wrong right then and there, but give them time to kind of decompress and then say, okay, what's going on. But also, the video chats helped. I think it gave us the opportunity to do things that we wouldn't normally do, maybe read some more, talk more. um it was a challenge in a sense that we couldn't see a lot of our friends that we were used to seeing, but I do think what helped is just being able to pick up the phone and reach out to these people and just try to help each other get through it. And what I did want to add, though, was for a short period of time, though, I did work for the mental health facility. So a lot of people were panicking. What do you mean you're closing the centers down? How am I going to get my medication? What about the doctor? So it was a lot of reassurance and just letting our patients know that, what, we're going to take care of you. We're going to make sure you get your medication. We're not going to let you fall through the cracks. So you already have some patients that are not very stable. And we're having to kind of walk them through a lot of situations, especially because a lot of them needed that person to person contact. So that was a bit of a challenge, but I think the company as a whole did a pretty good job of reaching out to our patients.
And another thing I would like to bring up is, you said, before the interview, asked, were you in any organizations or any involved in church, or said you brought up church, a bunch of times, did they provide any resources regarding, during COVID at all?
Yes, the church community, kept in contact via social media, and they even live streamed mass, which gave us a sense of home. It's a little different, watching mass from your couch, but at least we got to see, a familiar face, something of comfort. We got to see the inside of our church, through video. What I liked is that, when it was streamed, live via Facebook, people commenting, your old church friends, and you get to see that they're okay, and oh yeah, I was wondering how so and so is doing. There's a lot of these people you sometimes only talk to at church, but they're part of your community, and a lot of that, went away because we couldn't gather, we couldn't fellowship anymore. But in that moment, we were able to have somewhat of a fellowship, be able to still greet each other, via live stream. And then they provided resources like, pamphlets, brochures, words of comfort, to kind of deal with the situation. So they definitely reached out to us quite a bit.
Yeah, well, that's really actually good to hear. I'm glad that they actually were able to do that, such as providing for people that have been at home and, couldn't have access to these resources. Um, Another thing on on the opposite side of that, the political spectrum, I know it's been very political, even if people want to say it hasn't or it shouldn't have been, do you believe, politics has affected COVID and how it's been handled?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, politics affects everything, whether you're involved in politics or not. Definitely, it's just, I mean, you can go as far as just believing everything the government tells you, and or the other end of the spectrum where everything's a conspiracy theory. So it gets to a point where, man, who's right, who's wrong? Am I somewhere in the middle? Do I kind of, maybe I was drawn in at the very beginning, and I feared everything, and now I'm questioning, or what, I was one that thought it was a lie, and then I had a loved one die. But all of that, the media too has a big impact on how we portray our politics. That's where we tend to get most of our information from, on how our country is run, is through media. So yes, politics plays a great role, but the media has an impact on what they feed us in reference to politics. So if we don't do our own research, and if we don't do it the right way, then we're always, I think, going to be impacted in a negative manner, so, but yes, definitely politics. Oh yeah. And it's going to continue to be an issue. I mean, it still is. We have a new administration, and politics is still affecting COVID. So definitely plays a role in that.
Yeah, and that being said, going through shutdowns and all that, having, a loss of income, with all that being said, I wanted to see, like, on the work-related challenges, has COVID, like, impacted work? I remember you said you used to work at a mental facility and how you had to be laid off, how was that
Yeah.
been?
I was contracting with them, and I just got a call one day. It was in April, as a matter of fact, that their numbers were down. They couldn't charge. At that point when everything shut down, we still had to operate in some form or fashion. But a lot of the billing, with Medicaid and these insurance companies required a face-to-face contact. And we couldn't do that anymore. Some of our facilities, I mean, we were barely transitioning into the telehealth, so we weren't very, familiar with that. So the company lost a lot of money as they tried to find a way to be able to provide services remotely, but still be able to bill for these services. So as I was a contract employee, I'm going to be one of the first ones to go. So it was a little scary. Anybody that loses a job, you wonder, how long is the money you have saved up? How long is that going to last? Do I need to dip into my retirement? A lot of those things, come up, and even if you have those questions, pre-COVID, if that happens to somebody that has a job loss, typically they send their kids to school and then they come home and they do all their worrying. Well, we didn't have that opportunity to send our kids off and worry in private. So they sense that, it's the elephant in the room. Your mom and dad are out of work. Okay, so we know you need money to pay bills, and so they're like, are we going to be okay? Well, a 10-year-old shouldn't have to worry about those things. A 13-year-old shouldn't have to worry about those things. On top of, how do I do my online? How do I record my 5-minute video for band? That's enough worries for them to have to worry about, our mom and dad going to be able to, keep the lights on. But thankfully, our faith is strong, and we've been through worse, believe it or not. So we knew we'd get through it, and we have, thank God.
And I'm glad to hear that. I know you're recently, you said you're a hospice nurse before the interview. I want to see, like, was finding work hard for you during this time as well?
Actually, no, it really wasn't. I took my boards on September 11th, and I reported to my first day of work on September 16th. So no, actually it wasn't. What I did learn that was different, however, was the protocol prior to going into a patient's home. Whereas before, you just call the patient, hey, I'm going to stop by for my visit. And it turned into, you call them, you pre-screen them, with the CDC guidelines, ask them a whole bunch of questions. And then before you even get into the home, it's your full PPE. So that was another adjustment. Wearing the N95s, goggles that fogged up, you're in mid assessment and you can't even see the patient because your goggles are so foggy, and it's so hot, but finding work that was not a challenge. Now, that being said, we were kind of already adjusting a little bit better, to the pandemic. So I'm not sure what, the other cohorts that graduated before me, if they had any issues finding work. But I know at that time that we were fixing to graduate, Governor Abbott, he changed or added some little changes to some of the nursing students. They could work under a graduate nurse as a kind of like a temporary licensure, I guess, without having to take the exam. Some of the those that did not hold their licenses anymore were able to get them reinstated. The NCLEX itself, which is the exam for the nurses, that changed as well. It went from, it was a minimum of 75 questions to a minimum of 60. So they did shorten the exam, and I believe back in January, February this year. So yeah, it did impact us in that way, but I think they just needed more nurses, like more than ever. So they were happy to basically hire you on the spot. So
Mhm. Now, and that's good to hear. I know a lot of people have been facing challenges with trying to get a job. I know a lot of people that are struggling financially, and like we said before, what I like to get into is, with the whole virus and everything going out and mask mandated and everything being limited, I'd like to get into, how was your, during the conjunction with COVID-19, did you ever, how did it change your perception of going out, just leaving your household?
um well, I guess we just kind of only went out for the basic necessities, I guess. We didn't make it, I guess we try to see the positive in it. It's not like, well, we can't do this and we can't do that. It wasn't a can't thing. It's like, well, let's look at what we can do and make the best of it by still being safe. So, you know, um, maybe taking the kids up for a ride in the car, and or they go to HEB but they stay in the car, or one of us just gets down at HEB, or some modifications for sure, but mainly not making it a big deal. I know one of the things that was the hardest for my husband was going to the movies. That he would live there if he could. So when the movie theater shut down, that was really tough, because that was something that he'd like to do, with the family, take us out to a movie, and of course dinner and whatnot. But we were grateful that these restaurants that remained open, they had curbside, which is wonderful. But not being able to go to the movies was something I think that impacted him quite a bit. I know in May of last year, some of the um, facilities out on the river were slowly opening back up. So we took a trip out there, and we'd never been. So that was really nice, that we got to have that experience. Of course, what was even nicer is that there were hardly any other people out there. So it's kind of like we had the whole place to ourselves. So that was nice in that sense. But yeah, as far as outings went, very limited. We'd make sure we'd go and get just the necessities, and that way we wouldn't have to make frequent trips either. But yeah, it was okay.
It's good. I'm glad you got able to work around it and still have, time for your family and find peace within yourselves and everyone else around you. Speaking of peace, one thing I really would like to get into, going to kind of involving politics, was, I know there's been a lot of movements going on lately. I know Black Lives Matter. I also know that, there's also anti-vaxxers and vaxxers that aren't getting it what they want. The people that are protesting, trying to get a vaccine,
Mhm.
Have you by any chance participated in the protests at all? Has COVID-19 impacted that on whether the decision was to decide to participate?
But no, no, we're in such a small town that there really were no protests or anything. But I probably wouldn't have participated anyways. I just feel that I, I'm honestly just too busy. I barely have time to even read a chapter out of my favorite book. Are we educated? Yes. Do we take that time to speak to our children about that stuff? Absolutely. And it brings up questions of our own heritage, the Hispanic community, and so it does start a conversation, which I think is a good thing. But as far as the protest or anything, we just discuss those things at home with our kids. But as far as participation, it's like, okay, what's it gonna be? So, politics coming into it, saying, no, the CDC says you can't gather more than so many people. All of a sudden, that goes out the window to protest. Like that the hypocrisy, I think, is what I have a more difficult time with, and that I couldn't be encouraged to protest. I don't know. It was just a very discouraging time. I think, it almost makes you kind of want to lean that way on with the conspiracy side, a little bit, and like, well, yeah, they kind of have a point there, but got to kind of pull yourself back into that middle ground and just try to look at every aspect. So, but protests really didn't get that big out here. I mean, we're in a town of 3,000, so even if the whole town gathered, it probably wouldn't even seem that big of a protest anyhow. So,
No, and you're right. It is, tough for, for you to see the political spectrum, especially in smaller towns, because, typically, like that being said, it's hard for people to get advocated, especially when you can't make a huge impact, whether it be small towns, regardless of your political standing, I really don't have any other questions. The only other thing I would probably ask is, if there's anything else you would like to add or share about your experience with COVID, would you like to implement that?
Not really anything I can, think of. I just hope that, everybody, continues to be safe and, and just implement what we've known already. Wash your hands, keep your hands out of your mouth, but definitely not give up. There's something better for us, and we just got to keep moving forward, and that's it.
Alrighty, Belinda. Well, I want to thank you for your time, and thank you for, taking the time out of your day for actually doing this interview with us. I know this will be archived for the South Texas records, and also be used at the University of Texas. We partnered together. Again, thank you so much for your time. If you have any other questions, you'd like to ask me, or if not, we can go ahead and conclude.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. No problem. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.